Hello everyone, I'm Broughy1322 and welcome to another racing game review, this time for the new Need for Speed. Now we're going to be doing all of the same categories that we used for the Forza Motorsport 6 review, and that will remain the same across all of these racing game reviews. So first up we're going to be starting with physics. The physics of Need for Speed are frankly not that great at all. My aim with these reviews is to try to explain how these games are in terms of their merits as a racing game. How good of a racing experience can you have on these games? And when it comes to the physics of Need for Speed, it's just not there at all. Trying to take any of these corners with a regular racing line is always going to be slower than drifting around the outside, as you'll see later on. And that's just completely the wrong way to go about it from a racing perspective. You know, it doesn't allow you to have a proper racing experience or any kind of decent racing experience, and this is where sort of, I don't mind arcade physics, and arcade physics done well can actually sometimes be better than simulation physics, and that is sort of seen with Grand Theft Auto. It's reasonably accessible, but it's quite hard to master, and you can apply regular racing techniques to it. When it comes to Need for Speed, that's just not the case, and when you can go around the outside of corners quicker than people taking the inside line, it just makes it look ridiculous from a regular racing perspective, that is. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't fun. There is an aspect to it once you start getting used to the idea of drifting around these corners instead of going around them normally. It is a little bit more fun, but there's no sort of progression there of getting a little bit better. And with the the AI being very rubber bandy, and you never, there's no real skill there in terms of beating them. It's just waiting for the right moment with the catch up and all that kind of stuff. It makes this whole thing watered down a little bit, and not really what you would want from a racing game. So now we move on to the visuals, and this is where Need for Speed certainly claws back some points, because visually this game does look very, very beautiful indeed. The camera aspects of the cars, I would say that was the one thing that I thought could be improved a little bit in terms of the height, especially that we're used to Grand Theft Auto these days, where you can sort of change the height of the camera. When you're racing on streets, like Need for Speed wants you to do, you're going to be having oncoming traffic coming at various times, so you want to be able to see what's coming in front of you. So it would be nicer to have a bit of a higher camera angle there. But in terms of the visuals, it just looks fantastic. A negative aspect would be that it's always at night, and sometimes it seems to be raining more often than not. And the progression through the nighttime aspect, and then it goes to dawn and then back to dusk again, is a little bit, ruins the immersion a little bit. But visually, the game looks fantastic. The detail in sort of the road surfaces, the way that the cars are modelled, and how the environment itself looks, and how the city looks, is just very, very, very good. And it's kind of what you would expect from a next-gen style title, and it's just got a lot of polish to it. The reflections in the puddles and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very, very good. And although the physics may not live up to what you want, if you're looking for a game that just looks beautiful and you can sort of have a bit of fun going around it and enjoying the world that's being created here, Need for Speed is certainly a good option, especially with the different cars that you can have. They all look very good and sound very good as well, as we'll move on to in the next section. But yeah, in terms of visuals, it does it very, very well, and that's kind of what you would expect from a next-gen title such as this. Now we come on to the cars, and there are quite a few cars to choose from. Not certainly as much as you might expect from, say, Forza Horizon, which is the nearest open-world racing game that you could sort of try to compare it to. But the way that Need for Speed gets all of its points in this category is the customization that you can have. It's not necessarily about the number of cars and the different cars. It's about the customization that you can apply on those cars. Now, some of the higher end cars don't get quite as much customization, but the sort of the standard tuner style cars that you may have been used to from previous sort of Need for Speed Underground days and things like that. To those of us who played those games, that's all there, and you can really sort of get deep into this. The problem with it was that obviously a lot of these are level locked, and grinding through the levels to gain RP to unlock these things was a bit of a nightmare, I would have said. And certainly, some aspects were completely locked off. There wasn't even just a single option and then you could unlock more parts. Some were completely locked off. But in terms of the actual customization and the cars themselves, they're all modeled very nicely. They sound fantastic. Obviously, I've put EA on the side of this car because EA always make the best games. You can't fault the game really. Apart from a few minor issues, you can't really fault the game in terms of the way it looks or the cars that are offered when it comes to customization. Those are some really great aspects of the game, and if that's all you're interested in, then you could certainly do a hell of a lot worse than this game. Having said that, you could also do a lot better on a lot of other aspects, and the aspect that we're moving on to now is tracks. So when it comes to regular racing game reviews and regular racing games that I'm more likely to be reviewing as part of this series, the track selection is usually going to be a case of real world tracks like the Nürburgring, Spa, how they're sort of modelled and how they are implemented into the game, and how many of those that there are and the different combinations and things like that. That's what's going to get more marks, whereas something like this, it's very hard to sort of compare that with real world tracks, because this is essentially an open world and you're always racing on the streets. The problem that mainly arises from the tracks that you encounter in Need for Speed is that the majority of them have a lot of straight lines in them. They're very, very boring. As you get further sort of through the game, you do encounter a few more interesting tracks and a few more tighter tracks that may require a little bit more skill. But ultimately, I found that sort of the tracks themselves all feel very similar as well. There's not really a lot to them. They've all got that same feel, and I started to get a little bit bored. I just got a little bit bored with the same old thing, the same, even though they weren't the same roads, they felt like they were the same roads, and the corners, requiring no effort to get around them because you can just drift around them because of the physics. It sort of, again, diluted the appeal of the game to me. And again, how much of this was sort of the physics just making all the tracks feel the same because you don't really have to think about the corners, how much of it was the tracks themselves. But certainly in the very, very early stages of the game, all of the tracks are just long highway races really, and for me personally, I just got so bored early on, and it felt like a real grind just getting through those early stages, because again, there's nothing you can do about the AI and their rubber banding, which is what I'm going to come on to now, the single player aspect of the game. The one thing that I would say encapsulates the single player aspect of the game is cringeworthiness. It's just, the cutscenes are just awful, and it's just, I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older, but the whole idea of the story campaign is just ridiculous. The main aspect, the main objective of you in this game is to impress some other people who you don't know. And for me, it just seemed such a shallow aspect that a proper storyline and a proper racing game is, maybe it's asking a little bit too much, but we have had it before. There was nothing there. There was no depth to the story. The cutscenes were ridiculous. I don't know, it just, the whole system of RP, you had to do various different things, and I think that was one of the good things, that there was a variety of different aspects to the game, drifting and proper circuit races, time trials, things like that. But it was all built around this aspect of building up reputation and RP, which to me felt a little bit shallow. And also when you have the idea that basically, there's no sort of skill progression throughout the single player. All you have to do is, if you fail a mission or fail a time trial or something like that, you go and customize your car, add some performance modifications on, go back to the race, and you get it really easily. So, it's that again, there's no depth to the single player campaign. Not a lot to it. Just didn't really give me any reason to want to play it really, and again, it might just be me getting older and not really enjoying this sort of aspect of this thing, but I just expect so much more from a single player campaign on a game like this. Now, when it comes to multiplayer, again, not enough depth is there with the multiplayer. The game is always online, which is a negative, I think, because although it was quite interesting to be sort of going around the city and seeing other people doing their own thing and having their own races, for example, you could never sort of just even pause the game. It was a nightmare. You couldn't do that. So always online, in my opinion, hurt the game as a whole. There was just no need for it. And then the multiplayer offerings just weren't there either. There was nothing there that, again, made me want to come back and replay the game again, with the physics all involved in that. And really, the physics does sort of have such a huge impact on a racing game that if you can't get off with the physics, if they don't allow you that aspect of skill-based gameplay in the way that a racing game normally would, then it sort of affects every other aspect of the game. And with multiplayer, there was no depth there with it, and really nothing there that made me want to come back to it. And small number of people, no sort of online matchmaking where you can just jump into random lobbies of people and do some races. It just basically encapsulated the game as a whole, that it's okay, it's a bit of fun for every now and again, but it just had no depth there. The storyline had no depth, the physics had no depth, the multiplayer had no depth. It was just a very, very shallow game overall, and really didn't make me want to experience it any more than I had to be honest. So I guess now it's time to talk about the scores, and basically the scores generally show what I've just been talking about, how it is a fun game, and if you aren't really bothered about the physics and you want to be sort of slightly immersed in this world, this car culture world, in a game that looks visually very appealing and has lots of customization for cars, if that's the sort of thing that you want, then you will enjoy this game. But as a whole, for I would say the majority of people, there's just not enough there to keep people coming back. And really, overall, it's not a game that I would certainly recommend to everybody, unless it's something that you actually are interested in and want that sort of those features that Need for Speed offers that other games maybe don't. So that's pretty much it. I was pretty disappointed with it, to be honest, but there you go. Every game can't be perfect. I just want to finish up on saying a big thank you to funstockracing.co.uk for supplying me with the game to allow me to review it. If you do ever want any racing games, definitely check them out. You can use the code 1322 and that will get you 5% off as well. But yeah, thank you to you guys for watching as well. I really do appreciate it. Let me know all your thoughts on Need for Speed down below, if you've actually got it, or will you be buying it for Christmas, or has this review helped you at all? Yeah, let me know all your thoughts down below. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.